Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar, which is introducing Dataform. We're going to kick off in about 20 seconds. I'm just going to cover a couple of little bits of housekeeping just to give people a chance to settle as well. I know some people are still joining by the looks of it. So I'm Dara, I'm one of the co-founders at MeasureLab, and I'm just moderating today. I'll hand over to Matthew and Katie in a second, who are going to go through all of the content. There's just a couple of things to tell you, really. There's a chat feature in the right-hand sidebar, which you can use to add comments throughout if you wish. We are going to do a Q&A session at the end, so if you've got questions that you want to be covered, it's probably easier if you put them in the Q&A section, and then it'll keep them all together. And use the chat function if you're having any issues hearing us, or if there's anything else that you want to comment on throughout. And yeah, we should have hopefully around about 10 minutes at the end for Q&A. Okay, so without further ado, I'll hand over to Katie and Matthew.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm Katie. I'm an analytical engineer at MeasureLab. I work fairly heavily with SQL in BigQuery and also Dataform since we realised how great it is, which is what we're talking about today.
Yeah, and I'm Matthew Hewson. I'm Director of Engineering and Technology at MeasureLab. And similar to Katie, I spend a lot of my time in BigQuery and Google Cloud and singing the praises of Dataform. So, welcome.
Cool. Shall we dive straight in then? Oh, not yet, Matthew. Back up a minute. So, basically, we set up the webinar because we know that there's an awful lot of things people are wrestling with in BigQuery and schedules, with reports breaking, or many people in the warehouses that are touching things and doing things. And we've discovered that Dataform fixes an awful lot of those problems, and we're hoping that people are here to find out a bit more about Dataform and potentially go away with something that they can talk to their managers about why Dataform is a solution for those things. It is a much better environment to be, or a much safer environment to be storing this code in. So the plan for today is, first I'll show you why the scheduled SQL can get messy and fragile. And all the sort of pain points that you get in BigQuery schedules. Then we'll talk through Dataform and look at how it smooths out all those issues. And then after that, we'll show you a few of the sort of bonus features that can be really, really handy in Dataform.
So just a little bit of introduction to what Dataform is. So cloud and cloud warehousing has grown massively powerful over the sort of past 10, 15 years, really to the point where the scalability of it is near infinite. And what we've seen from that is it's facilitated this shift away from an extract, transform, load model where you would have got your data out and then passed it through some sort of more powerful computing resource to do all the transformation steps before ultimately loading the completed data into your destination, be it a warehouse, to an extract, load, transform model where you just extract the data, load it directly into your warehouse, and then use the power of these warehouses like BigQuery to perform those transformations with SQL and maybe some JavaScript functions and Python functions. This has meant essentially that a lot of the transformation keys to the keys to the transformation kingdom have been handed over to analysts and people who have SQL skills, which is fantastic because that is an abundant skill in a lot of data teams. But it does mean that people need to start thinking a little more about the principles of software engineering best practices to make sure that this stuff is robust and isn't going to fall over and isn't silently breaking. This is where a tool like DBT comes in and was created before Dataform, which allowed analysts to create these models and to apply these software engineering best practices. Dataform came from somebody who was an ex-Googler, left Google, created Dataform, and then in 2020, Google bought them, gobbled them back up, and then now it's very tightly packaged and integrated into BigQuery as a solution for managing all of these issues.
So I've worked in SQL for a really long time, and over that course of the time, I probably saved SQL bits of code in all of these places, plus random other ones. This is one of the biggest pet peeves of coming back to maybe somebody else's work. and where you don't have a single source of truth for where that SQL is. I think schedules have become that single source of truth for people using BigQuery, because we know that the schedule is what builds the eventual table that feeds the reports. So we know that that schedule is the key bit of code. But there's other elements that you don't necessarily schedule for. You know, you run a bit of code for somebody randomly, and you store it in the Google Sheet or in a Jira ticket or something. And the problem is when you come back to it, you might remember the sort of place you might put it, but somebody else coming back to it, which inevitably happens in 6 months' time, can't find it anywhere. So the dependency challenges of sort of code in schedules. As your warehouse gets bigger, you've got more and more analysts coming to write code, build tables. You've got script A depends on script B, and that depends on script C. And you've got other people coming in and starting to write a bit of code and going, hold on, this table exists. That looks really cool. That's got exactly the right data I need in it to build this other table I need for reporting. And then before you know it, you've got script on top of script on top of script, all these sort of nested scripts that are reliant on each other, but don't necessarily, they're not very clear, or there's not real clear understanding in the business of what relies on what. And then any changes to any of these bits of code within your schedule will have a knock-on effect to all of the schedule or bits of code further down the line. Won't necessarily cause an error, but it could change the data that's filtering through, because nobody's really understanding the dependencies that exist within the schedules, and it's really sort of messy and problematic and really quite risky to the business. This is really similar to dependencies. This is more about kind of, you set a schedule to run at 9 o'clock in the morning, which is dependent on another table being built. And if that table is not built by 9 o'clock, so let's take the GA4 data, for example. This is a key one for most people, is the GA4 can come through at any point in the day. Hopefully it comes in quite early in the morning, and it tends to, but there's been plenty of times that it's been delayed. You've got your schedule to run at 9 o'clock in the morning, and it runs, and the table comes in after that. You're actually reporting on 2 days ago, or exactly the same data that you had yesterday. Again, doesn't cause an error anywhere, but it isn't yesterday's data as you would expect it to be. We have found sort of slight workarounds for this, with using sort of if statements and the schema for the table to sort of find out what time that ran, and don't run the code until after that's run. But these can be really kind of clunky and not very easily visible for new people that are coming to your code, and unpicking this sort of thing can take a real long time. You've also got lots of user inconsistencies within SQL, especially the more analysts you have, the more individual ways of writing code, individual ways of how one person defines a session versus how another person defines a session. Again, reporting can get really messy, and especially when it comes to your sort of Looker Studio reports that are going out to management, and suddenly this manager looks at this report and that data doesn't match the same session information that this data has, and you've got to work your way through, work your way back to the code that builds it. Why is this person writing a session that way and this person's writing a session that way? Like I always say, there's lots of ways to skin a cat when it comes to SQL. There's lots of ways that you can write code very differently and get to the same result, or you can write code differently and it gets slight variations on what you're expecting. So inconsistencies within the code, again, can cause that sort of lack of trust in the data further down the field. This is my by far biggest pet peeve, is that you've got your schedule, you've written your bit of code, you're happy with it, you've scheduled it, and then 6 months down the line, something goes wrong with it. You come back to that bit of code and you look at it and you're like, I know I wrote this, but that doesn't look like the way I would write SQL. So who's been in here and who's touched it, and why did they add that bit in? What's caused this to fail? Oh, it's that bit of text that's just been added in, but I don't know where it's come from or who's done it. Really, really frustrating. Google is either has rolled out or is very soon about to roll out the fact that you can only change the schedule if you are the owner, the original owner of the schedule, or if you have access to the server's account that is on that schedule. even if it's a service account, if both colleagues have access to the service account, then they can easily make changes. So essentially the same issue still is there. And there's absolutely nothing worse than trying to figure out who's changed it, why they've changed it, and what they've changed. And inevitably it's guesswork. And yeah, you're never going to get the answer to who's changed it, but very, very frustrating element of the schedules in BigQuery.
There's also the issue of silent issues. Every day, and we see it all the time, people are reporting on, or they've got dashboards in front of people, or they're doing deep pieces of analysis on incorrect data. They don't know whether it's incorrect data because at some point within the data lifecycle, be it from source or be it through the various pieces of SQL transformations, something has gone wrong. Somebody may have gone in, like Katie says, and changed the definition of a session, or somebody may have done this, or there may be some emails not coming through, but something fundamentally isn't right, and nobody knows about it until it's too late and decisions have been made on those things. And they can go unnoticed for a very long time, and that can be really impactful and damaging to decision making and business processes.
So those are all the kind of the pain points of SQL in BigQuery and schedules in BigQuery. So how do we fix it? And that's where we're going to talk about Dataform. Dataform, you can get sort of proper dependency management, version control, and a workflow that is really quite simple to follow and makes a lot of sense. So before we had all these different places that you store things. When you're using Dataform, it's one location, it's GitHub. GitHub is hooked up to your Dataform. Everything flows through there. There's no more hunting around to where that code is. It's centralized, it's properly versioned and accessible to everybody. So yeah, anybody can access that code and pull it down from Dataform, put it down into Dataform and start coding from that. So within Dataform, what you do is you kind of create branches within the Dataform. So you've got the overall repo that contains the main branch, the main data, the main code. Then you create your own branch, and then future people, all they've got to do is go in and go, right, I want to start working on this bit of code. I'm going to create my branch. I'm going to pull down from the main, and there it is. That's the single source of truth that you're looking for. Everyone then saves code in exactly the same place. So saving code, accessing code, all one area. It's all in GitHub, and yeah, it's a beautiful thing to behold. Dependencies in Dataform. This is a really cool element. So basically, Dataform automatically handles dependencies. So it knows by looking at the bit of code that it has, what are the tables that it would be accessing for that bit of code? Have they run? Are they clean? You know, are they all done and dusted before I set off this bit of code? So those dependencies issues we had earlier don't exist in Dataform. It has an understanding because it has, it's configured the whole workflow within Dataform, which is great. You can explicitly sort of declare them in the config, as you can see here. That makes it just slightly easier for people to come in and kind of go, okay, this bit of code is looking at that, and that. But it's absolutely not essential. The Dataform will do the hard work for you there. So that workflow we were talking about, these are compilation graphs that you get in Dataform. Really, really easy for those sort of visual thinkers amongst us to see what tables, what views, what's the final outcome, where are we going to, what are all the views and tables that are affected by that, what happens before those views and tables, and it sort of really goes through the workflow from start to finish. So not only is this good for a new person to come into Dataform and clearly see what that workflow looks like, but it's also a great thing to share with other stakeholders that possibly aren't as SQL literate and can't sort of read code. They can easily see this and see what tables are affected by what. So those errors we were talking about earlier, it's really hard to spot errors in the BigQuery interface. Something could fall over, but other code continues running. It doesn't really care whether something else has fallen over. I've got this bit of code and I'm going to run it, even if that table's not built yet. Because of those dependencies, we can quite easily see that something has broken in a bit of script it's not only going to light that up red to say, come and look at me, I'm not working. It's also going to light up red everything that is dependent on that bit of code running. So it makes it really easy to see, hold on, all of this stuff is affected by this bit of code not running. I'm going to work my way back to the start, create a fix in there, really easy to sort of find. Fix that up. Hopefully everything becomes not red anymore. And if it doesn't become, if there's other things further down the line that are causing a problem as well, you just go to the next bit and next bit and next bit until you've sort of worked out all the bits of code and all the fixes that need to happen on it. But more often than not, it's one fix in one of them that's affected all the downstream. And once you fix that, everything's back to normal and working.
So just to go into a little bit more depth about how Git and Dataform work together, I know we've been mentioning GitHub most of the way through this, but it is technically Git, so it could be GitLab, it could be GitHub, it could be a number of different Git providers. Essentially, Dataform itself is kind of like a little mini Git environment within BigQuery. So you have repositories, and those repositories are collections of transformations that you may have. Say you have a marketing analytics repository and a finance repository that have the different models for those different use cases. And then, like Katie's already alluded to, you have different workspaces where each individual can work, and they are essentially analogous to GitHub branches, or they are GitHub branches. And what this allows is really tight collaboration. So you could have a Katie branch, a Matthew branch, and a Dara branch, and we can all be working on our own pieces of SQL, and we can be testing and running and doing all those things, all in the knowledge of knowing that we aren't affecting, we aren't each other's code, we aren't stepping on each other's code, and with full visibility of what is changing and where. The real power comes from connecting that little local BigQuery version of Git that is Dataform to GitHub or a GitLab. In that way, you can unlock things like your version history and the ability to roll back on code changes if there's any issues. You can create sort of UAT dev production environments where you can run code reviews. So Katie could push something up to her branch, and then we could have a code review process that checks that the data is correct and the SQL is fine before it gets pulled into the main branch. That protects those downstream data products of like dashboards or analysis pieces. And you also have audit trails within GitHub that allow you to see and ensure full accountability of who's changed what, where, kind of does the detective work for you, so you don't have to go scratching your head when something's gone wrong or something's changed.
Can I add one thing as well there, Matthew? Is that one of the really cool things that I find in Dataform is that within SQL you can comment things, but it's down to the individual to know whether they're going to comment on it or not. And also, even in GitHub, you can, like, even though it asks for a comment, you don't have to put it in. Within Dataform, you can't push something up unless you've written that comment in. It doesn't allow you to do it. So it really, really forces people to explain what they're doing and why they're doing it, which I think is really great, because when you come to the history in GitHub, you can really clearly see what's changed and what they did. I mean, they do have the ability to go, I'm not writing anything here, but hopefully they're not that type of person.
Yeah, so just to summarize what we've said there, really. So it allows those teams to collaborate and simultaneously within Dataform, creates these environments for individuals to build and develop work. It allows you to sort of test and run and build tables off the side. For example, you can have a development environment sitting in a completely different Google Cloud project that when you run, it just goes off to that different Google Cloud project and doesn't affect any of the production data. It allows you to really easily push things up to the main repository. The other thing I don't think we've mentioned as well, there's a lot here. We're trying to condense this down, but the other thing that becomes a lot easier with this is documentation. So being able to create readmes about specific repositories, or even the column descriptions and things being programmatically able to be passed around all of the different configs.
So another really brilliant bit of Dataform is that you can define bits of code using SQL and JavaScript. So this is a little bit like user-defined functions in SQL and BigQuery. But it can become, it can go down to just the sort of minutest sort of field. So you could define how you always want a session to be calculated, or how you always want to define a user. And then what you'll do within your code is you'll call that JavaScript into it. So what's really good about that is you've got one single place that is defined. Everybody using it will use that JavaScript to pull into their code. And then if at any point, I mean, especially when it comes to things like attribution or something, if you've created an attribution bit of JavaScript that's pulled into stuff, you can go and go, hold on, we've changed how we want to do attribution. We're going to change it on the JavaScript element, and that flows through all of the bits of code because everybody's pulling from the JavaScript rather than hard coding those blocks of code into their SQL.
And my favorite bit of Dataform, I think, is assertions, and assertions are essentially little data quality tests that you can run on your data. So there's tons of pre-built assertions. So these may be things like make sure there are no nulls in this column, or you could run specific row conditions. So make sure sign up date is past this particular date, and if they fail, it will either raise alarm bells or stop your pipeline. You can also create custom assertions to say you write a SQL query, and if that SQL query returns any sort of row, then it's failed. So some examples we've done for customers in the past in the learning space are somebody started a module before the module was even uploaded, or somebody's completed 5 of the same module over again, things that are very specific to that piece of data and that data source, being able to spot errors in that way. And like I say, you can either kill a process completely because you don't want to make add any errors to downstream data. You want to protect that downstream data and ultimately data products, or you can just have it drop into a table and say, FYI, this doesn't look right, it may want to be investigated, which I think this whole piece is something that really isn't that possible with just standard BigQuery in any kind of easy way. And a couple of other bonus things. Like I said, there's a lot Dataform can do, but we're running out of time, and there's loads more to talk about. But I kind of already mentioned a little bit the easy to manage metadata. So you could have one file that has all of the column descriptions across all of your different tables that are within your models, and then you just reference that in any of the configs of all those different tables, and then lovely column descriptions and table descriptions appear in the output tables. Something that I think we all need to get better at is making sure we handle the metadata. Dev prod environments, we've already kind of talked about, being able to separate out what you're working on and messing around with the SQL code from any production level pieces and dashboards and analysis data sets. User defined variables allow you to essentially reuse the entire code base again for different tables, for example. So one obvious example of this is you could have an entire model built around GA4 that creates session tables and events tables and all these sorts of things, and pass in the GA4 events table ID, and it will run that for every different variable and events ID table that it gets. So you can kind of reuse this for multiple different tables. Significantly faster understanding for when a new analyst comes in. So if you're onboarding people or someone needs to get to grips with things, having it centralized, documented, and in one place makes it a hell of a lot quicker for people to understand what is going on and how to work with it. And that also means that it's much faster to fix things when they go wrong, and it's much faster to integrate and add in new models. So overall, the amount of time analysts are spending fixing and fiddling is reduced, so they can be delivering a more impactful, deeper analysis pieces. We have a form that's kind of a questionnaire that takes you through a lot of the things that we will ask people when we're discussing if Dataform is right for them. So team size, types of data, size of data, all of these different questions. So you can go through that form, and at the end you'll get an assessment of where you're at with your current data stack, and if Dataform could be really useful and impactful for you and your business. I think that's it.
Yeah. You want to keep the previous one up for people in case they want to get their cameras out? Good
idea. And you can click for as long as you're in this webinar, you can click the call to action at the bottom as well. We've got some questions, and we got about 6 minutes left, so I think we should be able to get through them. So there's some in the chat and some in the QA, so I'm just going to rattle through them. So Ismat has asked a few questions. The first one is, should we explicitly state dependencies in the config metadata, or is it optional as we use the ref in the main query?
Yeah, I think it is optional. You don't have to put it in the config. What may be useful in the config is if a table isn't explicitly part of your flow, say you've got another table sitting over here or another data source sitting over here that isn't part of that standard reference structure, you can just call that dependency within the config, and it will still wait for that other off to the side table as well. So it just kind of gives you another option of declaring a dependency that might not be inside of that nice compilation graph.
Okay, and do we need to create a new workspace for new modeling tasks and then merge it to the main workspace, or how does it work?
It's up to you, really. The documentation within Dataform suggests that it's based on an analyst. So they say, like, Katie, Matthew, Dara, and we have a workspace each. I think that's why Dataform calls them workspaces rather than branches, like it's stated in Dataform, because they see it being an analyst place to work on the code base. But when we've been building larger projects and transformation projects and migrating people over to Dataform, we've tended to have, say, feature branches where we're creating the SQL for specific dashboards and tables and things like that. So I think it's dealer's choice based on what your kind of specific problem is. But yes, I would always say work in a branch, push that branch up to GitHub, and then pull that branch through to main once you're happy that there's no conflicts and things like that. GitHub handles a lot of that conflict resolution stuff for you, which is nice and makes it a little bit easier.
And a final one from Ismat. At which stage are the assertions created?
You could define before and after, can't you, Matthew?
Yeah, you can. The assertions tend to be defined within the config block, so you can have them as part of the table itself, and it will check the data that's within that table, row conditions and built-in things. And you can also build your own custom assertions as little separate files, and then call those custom assertions in the table config itself. So normally it's within the config block of the table definition.
Okay, and a question from Mahesh. Can I merge my Dataform instance with someone else? If yes, how can I differentiate between the two in future? Will that create two instances for me? One is mine and one is merged. And then they've said correction, I mean shared or merged workspace.
Yeah.
Sorry, Katie.
That's right. I was just saying that, yeah, I think he means workspace instead of instance. So I think what you're saying is this the branches, Matthew, do you think that?
Yeah. Yes.
What you're talking about?
Yes, I think essentially two people can push up their workspaces up into the main Git repository, for example, and those two branches will sit there off separate to main. And again, there's a couple of different ways you can go about this. You could then have a development branch that you pull both of those separate branches into. That helps you manage conflicts and things, and means you're not having to deal with conflict resolution on any production branch. Or you can have the two branches and they just get merged into the single main branch. So once the code is merged into that main branch for each of those, then it's resolved. And within Dataform, you can pull down the latest version of the code, which will pull from the main branch, and both you and your colleague will be working from the same code base again. It's just you just got to get into the habit of making sure you're pushing up and pulling through on a regular basis. Don't fall into the trap of just coding for 7 weeks and then pushing it up, because the chances of your code base and the main code base being out of sync become really high, and then it's much more difficult to resolve conflicts when you get that out of date. So if you just regularly get in the habit of pushing up, pulling in, you'll find it nice and simple.
And those branches will continue to exist within GitHub, won't they, even after you've merged with the main, so you can still see all the history of everything you've done within your branch. But yeah, I agree with Matthew completely. Like, merge as frequently as you possibly can, because those conflicts can get out of hand otherwise.
Okay, and with that, we are at time. So for anyone who is watching this now, we're going to share the video with you afterwards, so you can feel free to share that out with your colleagues or rewatch it, and obviously take a look at the assessment form that Matthew mentioned earlier that's still on the screen at the moment. But otherwise, thank you very much for joining. We hope you found it useful, and we'll see you at the next webinar.
Thank you.
Thanks.